Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today it's a very special day. You can tell because I'm wearing my Count Dante shirt. I want to bust this out when I've got something exciting to show you. And what I have for you today is finally put together a complete run of Tender Love Story. So I'm going to be showing you the whole run, which is only 4 issues, but Tender Love Stories. I've been working on this for a while. It's been a giant pain in the butt to put together. So just to go over it real quickly here, Tender Love Stories was from the short-lived comic publisher Skywald. Skywald was publishing comics 1971, and interesting company. All of their comics were these giant-sized 25-cent issues. And they're a lot like the DC big 25-cent issues at the time in that there's a new story at the beginning with a bunch of reprints. But as I'll discuss here, these are a little bit different from the sort of stuff you would get in the DC books in terms of being reprints. Skywald had a bunch of titles. They didn't really, I don't think, have any superhero titles, but they had all these different genre books, a lot of westerns, jungle books and stuff like that. But the hardest ones to find, none of them are that easy to find, but the hardest ones are definitely the romance books. So I've been trying to get these for a little while, and you've heard me talk about this in my previous videos, just the fiasco that it's been putting them together. And I haven't actually published yet the video, my haul video, where I got the last of the ones I've needed. So you'll be seeing that again when I finally get it, and you'll probably hear this story again. But short version is I got issue 1, no problem. Issue 1 is definitely the easiest one of these to find. And then I got a lot of romance books, and in it were both issue 2 and issue 4 for a really good price. And I thought, all right, I'm kicking butt now. And then when I got them, you may remember this, the issue 2, a whole bunch of panels have been cut out through the whole book. And so it was like ruined. You couldn't read any of the stories because of all the stuff that was missing from the book. So that was really irritating. Then I was on eBay, and there was a vendor that had 2 issues, and I immediately grabbed both of them, and I was so excited. I'm like, yes, finish the run. And then I realized after I paid that, nope, actually what I had just bought was a replacement for number 2. But instead of buying the issue 3 that I was missing, I accidentally bought another copy of issue 4. So at that point, I had issue 1. I had 2 copies of issue 2, but one of them was ruined. 2 copies of issue 4, no copies of issue 3, and these are not that cheap. These books are like $20, $25 each. So I'm just like setting money on fire here. I gave away the extra copy of the number 4 that I had in the last mystery box that I gave out. And then I finally got issue 3. Finally. And I've been outbid on issue 3 a couple of times. They don't come up that often. And when they do come up, a lot of times they're really overpriced on eBay. $40, $50, $60 plus. But I finally lucked into one that went really cheap. By really cheap, I mean it was still more than $20. But I was very excited to get it for the price I did and to finally finish this run. So let's get into it here. Tender Love Stories number 1. These very much look like the DC books of the time period. They're actually interesting. They occupy a space that is sort of in between the DC and the Marvel books, to be honest. As we'll see here, in some ways the designs and the art look a little more like Marvel, but they also have some recognizably DC elements. It's just there's so many DC books of the period where there's the guy with the guitar and or a guy on a motorcycle. And in this case, it's a guy on a motorcycle with a guitar. And he's saying, "I'll wait for you, Tommy, no matter how long it takes." And he's answering, "You know why I go for you, doll? You understand my kind of music," which of course is the title of the story. But then the other woman is thinking, Midge is a fool to believe him. That boy has no intention of ever coming back. And she looks angry about it. She's been burned before by Tommy, I think. Let me show you all of them, and then I'll talk a little bit about the contents. Issue 2, beginning. What do the romance stars say about your love life? Don't miss Sally Starr's astrology pages. You can skip that. So here's issue 2. This is the one where I have 2 copies, and the other one is missing a whole bunch of panels that mess up all the stories. How could you do this to me, Bob? I thought our love was real. And Bob, with this very sinister grin, like he couldn't be happier about breaking her heart because he's just a sociopath. Crystal, I told you once before I'd never marry a small town nobody. Just look at that guy. What a jerk. Look how happy he is that she's crying and upset. He's just loving it. Here's the issue 3 that was so hard to find, and it's the lowest grade of the ones that I have, although it's not too bad. And it has, I think the reason it's so expensive, it has this classic peace protest hippie cover. And I love yellow covers, as you know. So she's leading this protest. Interesting, there is a black woman right behind her, and the sign says student power, but so the woman is saying, I can't go with you, Greg. I gave my word that I'd lead this march. And then she's thinking, if only I could tell you how much I'd rather lead a love crusade to your heart. I haven't read this yet, but I'm interested to read this because there's a sort of a trope in a lot of these books where the women are sort of more liberal, and they're often involved in these protests and stuff. I talked a little bit about this in my last Vietnam video last week. And then the guy sort of has to set her straight. And a lot of times the woman ends up just sort of ditching all of her protest stuff to be with the guy. So there's a clear sort of cultural message being sent to the readers about what's right and wrong, and how the women should get rid of their dumb hippie ideas for these conservative menfolk, because of course those new ideas include women's lib, and that's bad for all the men writing the books. So I haven't read this one yet. Issue 4 is more of an overtly women's lib cover, and it's actually very similar to one of my favorites, which is the cover of Young Love 106, which also involves a female mechanic who's in love with a guy, and her job's causing her issues. So she's fixing the car. The guy has just won a race, and he's making out with this blonde, and the girl that's fixing the car is thinking, I love you, Jim Dixon, but Stephanie is the girl in your arms, and I'm the one who shares your love for the one thing we both have in common. I think there's 2 things they have in common. They're both in love with him, because I'm pretty sure he's in love with himself, and cars. So that's it. That's the whole run. Now, a couple little things I want to talk about, including the content. I dig their version of the corner box because it feels very like 19th century, like Victorian London, because it's this street lamp with a bunch of shingles hanging from it. and it's got the issue number, the date, the Skywald comics, and then it's got the little corner box, and this is on all the Skywalds. So you have the equivalent of the Marvel corner box up here, so you can see immediately that it's a Skywald. Can't miss it if these are on the shelves, because Skywald's the only one with a Victorian London like gas lamp for their symbol, but I love it. I also like the logo quite a bit. I think it's a really cool logo. So the content's really interesting, because, as I mentioned, each of these has a new story at the beginning. A lot of them are drawn by Kurt Schaffenberger, who, of course, is a great, classic artist. He worked a lot on the DC books as well. That's where I know him from, really, is from DC stuff. There's a couple, the writers are interesting. Like one of these romance stories is written by Gardner Fox. Now, this is 1971, so this is during a period where Gardner Fox had been fired from DC because he was trying to put together a union to get benefits. And of course, that they just fired him along with all the other old timers who wanted benefits. I've talked about that before, what an absolute jerk move it was on DC part, because these people are people that created the DC universe basically being dumped because they wanted some health insurance. Um, and so he's bopping around. He works over at Marvel in 1972 as well. So he's trying getting work wherever he can. But it's interesting to see Gardner Fox doing a romance story because that's a little odd. But what's really interesting about these backup stories is now the reprints. They're from the 50s and early 60s, multiple different publishers, but all publishers that are kind of out of business, publishers like Avon, even Prize. And but what's interesting is that artists have gone in and heavily altered the artwork to make them modern, to modernize them up to 1971, so they don't look like they're from 1955. And the artist who does a lot of the alterations in the book is actually Bill Everett. So you have this, and this is right before Bill Everett passed away, right? And he's, I think this is the same period where he's working over at Marvel on Submariner. It might be just before he moved to Submariner, but it's in the same period. And so Bill Everett 70s romance art over the top of 50s art by like a lot of it's by like Ross Andru and Mike Esposito, but with this new 70s gloss. So the art's really interesting. And of course, it's just a really interesting company and an interesting, if you're interested in learning more about Skywald, go over to Metarog's channel because he has a complete run of everything else. I think the only thing he doesn't have from Skywald is this complete run of Tender Love Stories, but he's got all the other titles, and I know he talks about the company there. My understanding is that their books actually sold okay. They were making money, they were doing okay, but all of their titles only lasted no longer than 4 issues. And my understanding from some interviews I've read in like Alter Ego is that it was a distribution thing. Now, at the time, of course, there was this fight between Marvel and DC where, they both increased their books to 25 cents. Marvel immediately dropped down to 20 cents, and DC took several months before they did the same. And by that time, Marvel had grabbed the market share because of they had the cheaper books. And so Marvel and DC were fighting, and at the time, so what they were both doing is they were putting out all these new titles in the early 70s, specifically to get as much of the space on the shelves at the newsstands. And so when Skywald was putting these out, the distribution company that was putting their stuff out basically came to them and said, we can't really keep carrying your stuff because what's happening is Marvel is giving us so many more books, and that we have to make space for them because Marvel's now our top seller. And so our vendors that we're giving the books to want the Marvel stuff out because that's what makes them money. And so because Marvel's selling so well right now, and they're putting out so many books to flood the market and get market share from DC, there's no space for your books on the market anymore. And so Skywald shut down their publications, not because their books were selling poorly and not because of the readers, but because the distributors could no longer carry their books because of Marvel's output. And so it's unfortunate. It's a sort of that constriction of the marketplace in the 70s where they were making less and less and less money from the newsstand. I think if Skywald had alternate distribution, if the direct market had come about 6 or 7 years earlier and Skywald could have had a direct market, they might have thrived because, again, from what I understand, the books were selling fine. they were doing just fine. It wasn't kind of an Atlas thing where they flooded the market with too many things and they weren't selling or whatever. Skywald apparently was doing okay. Their books were selling okay. They just couldn't find anyone to carry them anymore because of Marvel. So anyway, that's it. Tender Love Stories. I'll show them again. Number 1. There's number 2. Number 3. And number 4. A really cool little mini run and a huge pain in the butt to get these. But worth it. Now that I have it, it's worth it. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.